The old man hit the pavement before anyone had time to react. One moment he was seated on the corner bench outside the Millhaven bus depot, a paper coffee cup balanced on one knee, a canvas bag settled at his feet, watching the street the way old men do when they have nowhere urgent to be. The next moment he was not on the bench at all. He was on the ground. The coffee cup was rolling toward the gutter. The triangular flag case in blue canvas had slid several feet across the concrete, coming to rest against a stubbed-out crack in the sidewalk. Gideon Marsh did not get up right away. He lay on his side with one arm pinned under him, blinking against the early October sky, and the expression on his face was not pain exactly. It was the particular bewilderment of a man who has kept his dignity intact through hard circumstances and just had it taken from him in an instant by something entirely senseless. Sergeant First Class Daniel Voss of the United States Marine Corps had been walking Coda along the far side of the street when it happened. He saw the whole thing. Coda saw it first. If this story moves you, please subscribe, turn on the bell, and stay until the very end. Stories like this one deserve to be seen all the way through. The man who shoved Gideon was not enormous. He was maybe 40, thick through the middle, wearing a canvas jacket with the collar turned up against the October chill. He had the glazed forward stare and loose shuffle of someone who had been drinking since before the sun reached its midpoint. His shoulder had caught the bench on his way past. He had turned and shoved without apparent thought. The way a man already in an argument with the world adds one more name to the list. He stood over Gideon for a moment, then continued down the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets, as though nothing behind him required attention. 3 or 4 people near the depot entrance looked at Gideon on the ground, looked at the retreating figure, and looked at each other. Nobody moved toward the old man. Daniel was already crossing the street. Daniel was 39 years old, 6'1", built in the compact and functional way of men who have spent years in the field rather than in a gym, every pound of him earned by carrying weight over difficult terrain. His hair was dark brown, cut close to the skull, gone noticeably gray at the temples in the past 2 years, and his jaw carried 3 days of dark stubble. There was a faded surgical scar along his left forearm that he never explained, and a slight asymmetry to the set of his nose. His eyes were the color of dark river water, and they moved the way his eyes always moved, cataloging the street in steady horizontal sweeps, registering exits and angles and the posture of everyone in a 50-foot radius. He had been living in Millhaven for 7 weeks, sleeping in a rented room above a hardware store on Clement Street, while he waited for paperwork to clear on a piece of land outside town that had belonged to his grandfather. He had not intended to involve himself in anything while he was here. He had intended to wait somewhere quietly until a bureaucratic process ran its course. Coda was making that increasingly difficult to sustain. Coda was a German shepherd, 4 years old, 81 pounds, with a tan and black saddle coat, and ears that stood like 2 dark compass points. He wore a simple nylon collar, no vest, because Daniel had retired him informally when he himself separated from service. His eyes were amber brown, and they tracked movement the way a good working dog's eyes always did, with a precise, unhurried attention that missed very little. He had stopped walking the moment the man on the bench hit the pavement, his weight shifting forward onto his front paws before Daniel had consciously registered the sound. By the time Daniel turned his full attention across the street, Coda had already communicated everything necessary. Still watchful, waiting for instruction. Not aggressive, completely alert. Daniel crouched beside Gideon and set one hand on the old man's shoulder without gripping it. "Take a breath," he said. "Nothing's on fire. I've got you." Gideon Marsh was 71 years old, 5'8", thinned by age to something narrow and precise. He had a full head of white hair combed back from a broad forehead, and a face weathered by decades of outdoor work into deep lines and hollows that read as distinguished rather than ravaged. His hands were large for his frame, with swollen knuckles and calluses across the palm lines, the hands of a man who had spent a lifetime building and fixing things. A faded Marine Corps emblem was tattooed in blue-green on the inside of his right wrist, just visible below his jacket cuff. He wore a pressed flannel shirt and clean trousers, as though the morning had been an occasion he had dressed for. He lay on the pavement for another moment, taking the breath Daniel had offered, then pushed himself to sitting. His left hand came up to his jaw briefly. His jaw tightened once and then relaxed. "I'm all right," he said. His voice was measured and quiet, with the particular quality of a man who weighed words before releasing them. "Your hip took the concrete," Daniel said. "I know where it took," Gideon said, not unkindly. He looked at Daniel for a moment. Then he looked at Coda, who had settled to a sit 3 feet away and was watching Gideon with steady amber eyes. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Gideon's expression, some internal gate releasing. He extended one large knuckled hand toward the dog, and Coda leaned forward and pressed his nose to the back of Gideon's wrist. Gideon let out a slow breath. He did not say anything. Daniel retrieved the canvas bag and refilled its spilled contents carefully: a folded newspaper, a leather wallet, a blister pack of aspirin, a small spiral notebook. He picked up the triangular flag case and placed it on top of the bag, taking a deliberate moment with it, treating it the way it deserved. Gideon watched him do this and said nothing. But the watching carried weight. "You want to sit?" Daniel asked, nodding at the bench. "I was sitting," Gideon said, "until I wasn't." Daniel looked in the direction the man had walked. He was nearly half a block away now, not running, just moving with that listing gait, hands still in his pockets. Dark green canvas jacket, brown work boots, a right side lean when he walked, the kind that develops when a knee gives out gradually over years. He was the kind of man who was not going anywhere specific, only away. Daniel understood that particular directionlessness better than he wanted to. He filed the image the way he filed all images he expected to need again, placing it where he could retrieve it whole. He helped Gideon to his feet. The old man accepted the assistance without ceremony, one hand on Daniel's forearm, rising steadily, testing the hip with his weight. He settled onto the bench with the same composed attention he had been wearing before any of this happened. He looked like a man who had been inconvenienced, not diminished. "You wait here for a bus?" Daniel asked. "I wait here most mornings," Gideon said. "The bench faces the right direction." Daniel sat on the far end of the bench. Coda lay down between them on the concrete, his chin settling to his paws. The three of them watched the street together for a long time in the thin October light. That was how it started. The morning after, Daniel came past the bench, with Coda on his way to the county assessor's office for the 4th time that month. Gideon was already there. He had brought a second paper cup of coffee and set it on the end of the bench nearest where Daniel had been sitting the day before. He did not make a presentation of it. He simply nodded when Daniel sat down and pushed the cup along the bench with one finger. They drank their coffee and watched Millhaven arrange itself into the day. A delivery truck double-parked at the hardware store 2 doors down. A woman with a small child waiting at the crossing. The October sky flat and pale above the low commercial buildings. Millhaven was a city that had downsized from larger purposes. A rail hub once, a manufacturing center, but had done so without desperation, which gave its streets a sense of continuity. Daniel had noticed this when he first arrived and found it unexpectedly restful. Coda had greeted Gideon with the same measured approach he had shown the morning before. Nose to the wrist, a single, unhurried wag. Gideon's hand had rested on the dog's broad skull with the ease of familiarity, though they had met only once. "That flag," Daniel said eventually. Gideon looked at the canvas bag between his feet. "My brother," he said. "He didn't make it back. I carry it for him when I go out. He would have liked to go out." That answer stayed in Daniel's head longer than he expected. Over the following week, he learned Gideon's shape, in the way you learn someone when you share a bench each morning, and neither of you is performing anything. 2 tours in Vietnam, returned in 1971, spent the next 4 decades as a carpenter and millwork specialist, married a woman named Vera, who had died of a stroke 9 years ago, living alone since then in a rented apartment on Daly Street, 6 blocks from the bench. A daughter in Spokane he called on Sundays. A neighbor named Russell who checked on him when the weather turned bad. No complaints, he said, as a general principle, and Daniel believed him. What he came to understand through accumulation was that Gideon had a way of watching the world that was uncommon in a man given repeated reasons for bitterness. He watched everything with the same patient steadiness Coda brought to it, without fear, but without illusion either. He had noticed, for instance, that the man in the green canvas jacket was named Dale Pruitt and lived in the narrow apartment building on the east end of Garrison Street, and that Pruitt drank at a bar called Hennessy's most evenings, and that this had been the pattern for about 3 years since Pruitt lost his job at the grain processor out on the county road. Gideon did not offer this as gossip. He provided it as a man provides useful intelligence, quietly and precisely, with no editorializing attached. "He's not mean by nature," Gideon said one morning. "He's a man who got lost and hasn't found his way back to who he was." Daniel said nothing to this. "Doesn't mean what he did was acceptable," Gideon added. "I'm not saying that." "I know you're not," Daniel said. On the 7th morning, Daniel arrived to find Gideon already in conversation with a woman from the city parks department who had the practiced neutrality of someone delivering information she found uncomfortable. "Sir, I'm just informing you of the ordinance," she was saying. 45-minute occupancy limit. It's been posted on the benches since August." "I've sat here for 6 years, Gideon said. "I understand that, sir." "The bench was here before the sign." Coda's ears went forward. He fixed his gaze on the woman with focused, unhurried attention that was not threatening but was unmistakably present. She glanced at the dog and back at Gideon. Daniel sat down on the bench without comment. He was not looking for a dispute with a parks employee doing her job under a bad ordinance. He was noting the thing accurately, the way Gideon did. After she left, Gideon watched her go with the same steady expression he gave everything. "That's new," he said. Daniel had looked into it as a habit of attention. The ordinance was part of a downtown revitalization initiative. A development company called Meridian Urban Partners had presented a plan to the city council the previous spring, a mixed-use commercial project that would require redesigning the block, including the bus depot plaza and everything in it. The 45-minute ordinance was the soft version of making the space inhospitable before the formal development application moved forward. He had seen this particular logic before. It was very old logic wearing new clothes. He told Gideon about Meridian. Gideon looked at the bench, at the street, at the triangular case in his canvas bag. "This is where people wait for the bus," he said. "Where do they wait during the construction?" "Still working out the details, apparently," Daniel said. Gideon was quiet for a moment. A bus went past and stopped at the far end of the block, its doors opening and closing. He watched it with the attention he gave everything. Vera paid $35 to put a memorial plaque on this bench in 2001. My brother, Bernard. He was 19 when he died in Vietnam. He reached down and turned the front lip of the bench seat upward slightly, showing Daniel the underside near the left leg. The plaque was still there, small and brass-colored, worn to a warm matte, but legible. Bernard Marsh, 1951 to 1970. She wanted him to have a place in the world, a public place, out in the weather, where people waited and watched and the day went by. Not a cemetery, not a wall somewhere that you had to drive to, just a bench on a corner where ordinary life happened, so he'd be part of it. He released the seat gently. If they tear this out, they tear out the last public thing with his name on it, and the people who ride that bus don't know. Every day they wait here. They're resting beside a man who never got to be old. That hit Daniel harder than he expected. He took a longer route home that afternoon, walking slowly, Coda matching his pace. He thought about his grandfather's land outside town, the fence line that needed mending, the access road that had washed out, the caretaker structure with its collapsed roofline. He thought about the particular emotional efficiency of a man who had learned that caring about places made leaving them complicated, and about how carefully he had maintained that efficiency for 12 years. Standing on the boulevard with Coda at his side and Gideon's voice still in his ear about $35, and a brother named Bernard, he could feel the efficiency doing something it had not done before. It was failing. He went to the county records office early the next morning. Sandra, the assessor's clerk, who had been patient with his repeat visits, pulled the documents without asking why he wanted them. He photographed every page thoroughly. The Meridian Urban Partners City Council filings were public record, and the timeline they showed was not subtle once you understood what you were looking at. Preliminary zoning variance request filed in February. 3 council members received documented contributions from affiliated PACs that same month. The Ordinance Committee that drafted 1114 was chaired by a council member whose campaign treasurer appeared on Meridian's registered agent's documentation. None of this was concealed exactly. It was hidden in plain sight, visible to anyone who chose to look, which was its own kind of arrogance. He spent the rest of the afternoon pulling 3 additional years of Meridian's public filings from 2 other counties in the state. The pattern held. In a city called Farnham, an elderly couple named Brecht had lost their home to a condemnation process initiated 6 weeks after Meridian filed a variance request that included their lot number. They ended up in county housing while an appeal worked through the courts for 2 years. The condemnation was overturned. The Brechts declined to return. The lot had been absorbed into Meridian's project in the interim. It was a clean, legal, deniable chain of events that left 2 people displaced from their home and nobody in a courtroom. He called Caldwell in Boise, described what he had found without editorializing, and listened. Caldwell said what Daniel had found was not unusual and was also not legal in the technical sense in which it had been deployed. He gave Daniel a name. Renata Voss ran the Millhaven Courier online. She was 44, compact and direct, with dark eyes and a clipped precision to her speech that indicated she measured words carefully. She met Daniel at a coffee shop on Clement Street that afternoon, studied the photographs from the records office without hurrying, and was quiet for a long moment after she finished. "I've been watching Meridian for 8 months," she said. "You know about the ordinance." "I know about the ordinance and the contributions and the rezoning timeline." I have been waiting for documentation I can print. She looked at the photographs again. This is the documentation I can print. He showed her the Farnham material. Her jaw tightened once. This needs to go to the State Ethics Board, as well as the paper, she said. Not just one. Both. Simultaneously. Agreed, he said. There was one more thing he needed to do, and it was not related to documents or council filings. He went to Hennessy's bar on a Thursday evening and sat at the far end with a glass of water and watched the room the way he had been trained to watch rooms. Dale Pruitt was at a table in the middle, alone, nursing a glass of beer with the hollow economy of someone drinking out of habit rather than pleasure. He looked smaller than he had on the street. In the bar light, his face showed its age more clearly, and the tiredness ran deeper than the surface of it. Daniel carried his water glass to the table and sat down across from Pruitt without asking. Pruitt looked up. I was on the other side of the street, Daniel said. Wednesday of last week, when you walked past the bus depot bench. Pruitt's face moved through several things in quick succession. He set his glass down. The man you shoved was named Gideon Marsh, Daniel said. He's a Marine veteran. He was carrying his brother's flag. His brother died in Vietnam in 1970. Pruitt was still. His jaw worked without producing a word for a moment. He didn't file a complaint, Daniel said. I'm not here in any official capacity. I'm telling you as one person to another because you need to know what you did and who you did it to. I don't remember that morning, Pruitt said. Then immediately, that's not an excuse. No, Daniel said, it's not. Is he? Pruitt stopped. Is he all right? His hip was bruised. He sat back down on the bench after it happened and watched the street for another half hour. That's the kind of man he is. Something moved across Pruitt's face that was difficult to look at directly. He stared at the table. There's a program at the Veteran Center on Keller Street, Daniel said. Peer support group on Tuesday evenings. I don't know your history, and I'm not assuming anything about what brought you here. But I've seen what that group does for men who got lost somewhere along the way and couldn't find who they were before. Pruitt's eyes were red at the rims when he looked up. I'm going to find him, he said. I'm going to say something to him in person. That's between you and him, Daniel said. I think he'd hear you. He left the bar and walked the long way home, the night cold enough now that his breath showed in the lamplight. Coda's paws quiet on the sidewalk beside him. The elm trees had dropped most of their leaves, and the boulevard was a continuous, soft rustling underfoot. On Tuesday morning, he arrived at the bench to find Gideon in conversation with a man he had not met before. The man was perhaps 60, stocky, with a close-trimmed white beard, wearing a quilted work vest over flannel, and carrying a tool bag that indicated purpose. His name was Roy Steck, and he was a retired civil engineer who had worked for the city for 30 years and now volunteered with the Millhaven Heritage Preservation Society, a small but formally recognized organization with standing to file public comments on development applications. Roy had been reading Renata's preliminary article about the Meridian timeline, which she had posted online Friday as a précis of what was coming in the full Monday print run. He spread papers across his knees with the organized energy of a man who had been waiting for exactly this kind of problem. He knew the zoning code the way a Marine knew his equipment, chapter and page. He had identified 4 procedural violations in Meridian's variance application, 2 of them substantive enough to require the council to reopen the public comment period. He had already drafted the formal request to the city clerk and wanted Gideon's name on it as a bench sponsor of record. Coda walked over to Roy, sniffed his hand once, and settled to lying at the man's feet with the ease of a dog who has confirmed what he needed to know. Others arrived over the following days. Clara Odom, who ran the Millhaven Community Kitchen 2 blocks east, and whose clients depended on the bus depot for transport. Henry Prather, retired Union Hall, still connected to the building trades. An attorney named Darlene Park, who worked municipal law and came looking for context after reading Renata's preliminary piece. None of them were asked. They arrived because they read something or heard something or saw Roy's name on the Heritage Society filing and knew Roy did not attach his name to things that were not serious. The bench became, for 2 weeks in October, something between a gathering point and a field position, which Gideon observed with a composure that was either stoicism or quiet satisfaction, and was likely both. Renata's full piece ran on the Monday Courier. It named Meridian Urban Partners, documented the council contribution timeline with precise dates and amounts, laid out the Farnham case and the Brecht family story, and included the Ethics Board filing number that she and Daniel had submitted jointly the previous Wednesday. It did not speculate beyond what the documents contained. It did not need to. Preston Hale's sedan appeared on the block that Monday afternoon. He did not get out. He sat in the car for 3 minutes with a clear line of sight to the bench, then pulled away. Coda raised his head when the sedan arrived and tracked it with his ears until it turned the corner. He put his head back down on his paws. "He's considering his options," Daniel said. "Let him consider," Gideon said. The State Ethics Board formally acknowledged the complaint and assigned it an investigative track, which meant the complaint had standing and weight that would follow Meridian Urban Partners into every subsequent city council appearance for as long as the investigation remained open. The variance application was quietly withdrawn the following Thursday. No statement, no press release. Roy brought the city clerk's confirmation email to the bench the next morning and placed it in Gideon's hand without ceremony. Gideon read it once, folded it, and placed it in his canvas bag beside the aspirin and the notebook. $35, he said quietly. Roy looked at him. "What?" "Nothing," Gideon said. He looked at the bench a moment longer. "Thank you, Roy." The ethics investigation moved through the fall with the patient, grinding momentum of institutional accountability, undramatic and incremental and real. Renata followed it with 2 additional pieces. One was picked up by the state capital's daily paper. By December, Meridian Urban Partners had filed for a corporate name change with the state registry. One of the 3 council members stepped back from the development committee, citing personal reasons. The ordinance itself required a council vote to repeal. That vote was scheduled for the 3rd Tuesday of November, and Darlene Park had filed a procedural challenge to its legal basis in the interim, creating enough institutional uncertainty that the Parks Department quietly stopped enforcing it in the weeks before the vote. On the morning Darlene filed, the Parks woman named Bevins walked past the bench, glanced at Gideon, looked at her clipboard, and kept walking without stopping. On a Wednesday afternoon in mid-November, a man came walking up the block from the direction of Garrison Street. He was walking straight, which was different from before, and wearing a clean gray coat instead of the canvas jacket. He was carrying a white paper bag from the bakery at the next corner. He stopped in front of the bench and stood there with the expression of a man who has prepared what he needs to say and is not sure any of it will be sufficient. "Mr. Marsh," Dale Pruitt said. "My name is Dale Pruitt. I live on Garrison Street." Gideon looked at him. Then he looked at Coda, who had raised his head and was studying Pruitt with the amber attention he gave everything. Coda's tail moved once, slowly, and settled. His posture had none of the forward tension of a warning. He was watching clearly, with no judgment in it. Gideon turned back. "I know who you are," he said. Pruitt held his ground. "I want to tell you I'm sorry," he said. "What I did was wrong. There's no reason behind it that makes it acceptable. I wanted you to know that I understand that." The street moved around them in its ordinary way. A bus passed the intersection. A woman pushed a stroller through the crosswalk. The sky, which had been overcast for most of October, had finally broken to a pale, thin blue. Gideon studied Pruitt for a long moment with those steady eyes. "Come sit down," he said. Pruitt glanced at Daniel, who was looking at the street. He sat down on the open end of the bench. He set the paper bag between himself and Gideon's canvas bag. "I brought something from the bakery," he said. "I didn't know what you'd want." "What's in it?" Gideon asked. "Cinnamon rolls," Pruitt said. "They look like they might be reasonable." Gideon looked at the bag for a moment. "They might be," he said. He opened it and handed one to Pruitt without further comment, and they ate in the particular silence of people who have gotten past the hardest part of something and are only now learning what comes after. Daniel had not planned to still be in Millhaven in December. The land paperwork had cleared several weeks ahead of schedule, and there was no structural reason remaining to stay. 40 acres outside town, a fence line down in 2 places, a washed-out access road, a small caretaker structure that needed roofing. He had the skills for all of it. He had, for years, told himself he was waiting for the paperwork before he could begin. And now the paperwork was done, and he was still sitting on a bench in October when the paperwork was done. He understood what that meant. He had been understanding it for several weeks without addressing it directly. He told Gideon about the land one morning in late November, holding it simply, the way you hold something when you want to hear how it sounds, said aloud to a person you trust. Gideon listened without interrupting. He looked at the street afterward and was quiet. "You know what I did for 40 years?" he said. "Carpentry," Daniel said. "Millwork." "Built things," Gideon said. "Fixed things that needed it. Stayed with them long enough to see them hold." He turned his cup in his hands. "A man needs a project, Daniel. Not to keep busy. A project is a way of saying you intend to be somewhere long enough for it to matter." Daniel looked at the elm trees along the street, bare now, the November sky behind them the color of cold steel. He drove Dale Pruitt to the Veterans Center on Keller Street for the first time on a Tuesday in December, when Pruitt's car had a flat on Garrison, and the timing happened the way timing sometimes does. He sat in the parking lot with Coda and waited. He had not been asked to wait. He had learned from Gideon that some things you wait through, and the waiting is part of what makes the thing real. He was in Millhaven in January when Gideon's hip, which had never fully settled since October, caused enough trouble that his doctor wanted imaging done. Daniel drove him to the imaging center on a morning of hard frost and waited in the lobby with Coda at his feet and an elderly woman across the room smiling at the dog with the particular warmth of someone who needed to look at a good animal for a few minutes. The scan showed a minor fracture, old and partly healed, the kind produced by a fall that was never properly evaluated. Gideon would need a cane for period. He used it without complaint, which was how he did everything. In February, Roy Steck and Henry Prather arrived at Gideon's building on Daly Street on a Saturday morning with tools and 2 men Henry knew from the Union Hall. They fixed the loose handrail on the stairwell that Gideon had mentioned once in passing 4 weeks earlier and had not mentioned since. They fixed the broken latch on the second-floor window and the draft under the building's front door. When Gideon returned from the bench and found them working on the stairs, he stood at the bottom and looked up with an expression he then carefully contained. "You didn't need to do that," he said. "You're right," Roy said. "We didn't need to." Gideon looked at them for another moment and then nodded once. He went upstairs and made coffee and brought it back down, and they drank it together on the landing. And Daniel was not there for any of this, but Gideon told him about it the next morning on the bench, straightforwardly, without sentiment, the way he told things. The bench on the corner by the bus depot was still there in March, when the elm trees along the boulevard began showing the first tight green of their coming leaves. The plaque reading Bernard Marsh, 1951 to 1970, was still fixed beneath the left side of the seat. The bus routes still ran on their old schedule. The paper bag from the bakery appeared at the far end of the bench most mornings now, brought by Dale Pruitt on his way to the early shift at the hardware store on Clement Street, 2 doors down from the room where Daniel kept his gear. Coda greeted Pruitt the same way every morning, nose to the wrist, a single measured wag, the assessment long since settled. Pruitt had come to the Veterans Center 3 times a week through January and February, and whatever he was finding there was doing what those things can do when a person is ready to let them. The fence line on the 40-acre piece was mostly repaired by late March, Daniel doing most of it himself on early weekend mornings, driving out before full light with Coda in the back of the truck and working until the cold broke in the early afternoon. Roy came out twice with additional posts and a borrowed mechanical digger, and between the two of them they set what needed setting. The access road would wait for April when the ground softened enough to grade. The caretaker's structure had its new roofing done by the end of February, and inside it smelled of fresh cedar, a smell that lived in a specific place in Daniel's memory, mornings from early childhood on this same land, his grandfather moving through the barn before dawn, the coffee and the cold and the cedar, and the sense that the day would unfold as days were supposed to unfold, purposefully, in a place that intended to hold you. He had not been back to this land since he was 12 years old. He had not understood until he stood inside that small structure in the cold February dark with a hammer still in his hand and the cedar smell all around him. How long he had been carrying the weight of staying away from it. He sat on the bench on a morning in late March when the sky had given up its flat winter gray for something with movement and depth, clouds with dark undersides and stretches of pale light breaking through between them. The kind of sky that indicates the season is actively deciding. Coda lay at his feet. Gideon sat at the other end with his cane hooked over the armrest and his canvas bag and his coffee, watching the street with the same patient attention he had given it every morning for years. "My daughter wants me to come visit in April," Gideon said. 2 weeks in Spokane. "You should go," Daniel said. "I intend to." Gideon turned his cup in his hands. "The bench will still be here when I get back." He was quiet for a moment. The street moved through its morning. A bus came and went at the stop. An old sedan pulled slowly past, looking for parking. "You going to be here?" Gideon asked. "When I get back." Daniel looked at the elm trees, at the green beginning to work itself out from the tight buds along the bare branches. He thought about the cedar smell and the 40 acres of quiet and the fence line that held and the access road that still needed grading, and about the way the morning light crossed that land in early April, with frost still in the grass and the whole world still clean with what it was becoming. "I'll be here," he said. Coda raised his head from his paws and looked at Daniel with those amber eyes, steady and unhurried, the way he had looked at Gideon on the pavement that first October morning, the way he looked at everything he had already decided about, as though the matter had been settled some time ago and the only thing remaining was for the person to arrive at the same conclusion. Gideon nodded once. He lifted his coffee cup in the small gesture that meant between them what a longer speech would mean elsewhere. They watched the street together, the March sky shifting overhead, the elm trees making their slow decision toward green, the bus depot sending and receiving the ordinary traffic of people going where they needed to go. Finally, home. If you stayed with this story until now, thank you. There is something in it that is older than the story itself. The idea that dignity is not given once and kept safely, but protected again and again by whoever chooses to show up. You may know someone like Gideon Marsh, a quiet person carrying something they never speak about, sitting somewhere that matters to them in a way nobody thinks to ask about. And you may know, or be, someone like Daniel Voss, who told himself he was only passing through. Sometimes the place you are only passing through turns out to be the one that was waiting for you. Sometimes the bench is the whole point. May God bless you and everyone you love, and may you always have someone beside you who sees what matters before you have to say it out loud.